"You people always cause trouble," the flight attendant sneered at Jaden Harris. Little did she know she was insulting America's newest tech billionaire. As security approached, Jaden smiled. The entire cabin gasped when they realized who would actually be leaving the aircraft. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever witnessed discrimination in public spaces. The way this flight attendant treats a passenger she doesn't recognize will make your blood boil. Wait until you see the moment everything changes. The Atlanta International Airport bustled with activity on that sweltering July morning. Travelers rushed to their gates, dragging luggage and clutching boarding passes as announcements echoed through the terminal. Among them walked Jaden Harris, his 6-foot frame moving with purpose toward gate C-16 where first-class passengers were already lining up for the flight to San Francisco. At 35, Jaden had achieved what most could only dream of, a net worth of $4.7 billion as the founder and CEO of Harris Innovations, a revolutionary tech company specializing in artificial intelligence solutions. Yet nothing about his appearance suggested his extraordinary wealth. He wore dark jeans, a simple navy button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and a pair of minimally branded sneakers. His only luxury indulgence was a sleek titanium watch that had been his first significant purchase after his company went public. Jaden preferred it this way. Keeping a low profile had become second nature after years in an industry that wasn't always welcoming to someone with his background. He had learned that in the tech world, and frankly in America, a black man often had to work twice as hard for half the recognition. When the gate agent called for first-class boarding, Jaden lined up behind an older white couple and a middle-aged white businessman in an expensive suit. The gate agent smiled warmly at each passenger, scanning their boarding passes with practiced efficiency. When Jaden approached, however, her smile flickered momentarily before returning with noticeably less warmth. "First class only at this time, sir," she said, emphasizing the "sir" in a way that made it sound less like respect and more like an afterthought. "Yes, I'm aware," Jaden replied calmly, presenting his boarding pass. The gate agent examined it with unusual scrutiny before reluctantly scanning it. "Enjoy your flight," she said, already looking past him to the next passenger. Jaden had grown accustomed to these microaggressions. They were woven into the fabric of his daily experience, subtle enough to be dismissed if mentioned, yet persistent enough to create a constant undercurrent of unease. He boarded the plane, nodding politely to the flight attendant greeting passengers at the door. Inside the cabin, another flight attendant, her name tag reading Amanda Pearson, directed passengers to their seats with practiced efficiency. Jaden noticed how her smile brightened as she guided the older white couple to their seats in 2A and 2B. "Can I take your jackets? Would you like a pre-departure beverage once we're settled?" Amanda asked them, her voice warm and accommodating. When Jaden approached his seat in 3C, Amanda's demeanor shifted perceptibly. Her smile thinned as she gave him a quick once-over. "Your boarding pass, please," she asked, despite having not requested this from any previous passenger. Jaden produced it without comment, and she studied it with obvious skepticism. "Are you sure you're in the right section?" she asked, her tone suggesting she believed he wasn't. "Yes, 3C, Jaden confirmed, keeping his voice even. He'd been in this situation too many times to let it provoke an emotional response. Amanda reluctantly stepped aside, allowing him to take his seat without offering to take his jacket or mentioning a pre-departure beverage. Jaden settled into the wide leather seat, placed his laptop bag under the seat in front of him, and took out his phone to send a quick text to his executive assistant, Maya Johnson, confirming he had boarded the flight. As other first-class passengers boarded, Jaden observed Amanda's interactions. Without exception, the white passengers received warm welcomes, offers of assistance with luggage, and promises of drinks once settled. He wasn't the only one who noticed. An elderly white woman in 1D watched the proceedings with increasing disapproval, her lips pursed into a thin line. Once all first-class passengers were seated, Amanda began taking drink orders. She moved methodically through the cabin, starting from the front, jotting down preferences with a practiced smile. When she reached the businessman across the aisle from Jaden, she was particularly attentive. "And for you, sir?" she asked Jaden's neighbor, a well-dressed white man in his 50s. "Sparkling water with lime, please," he requested. "Excellent choice, Mr. Blackwell," Amanda replied, having clearly noted his name from the passenger manifest. Then she skipped Jaden entirely, moving to the passenger behind him. Jaden wasn't surprised, but he was growing increasingly frustrated. When Amanda passed by his seat again with a tray of drinks, he raised his hand slightly to get her attention. "Excuse me, I haven't ordered yet," he said politely. Amanda's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'll be with you momentarily," she replied without stopping. 15 minutes passed. Every passenger in first class had received their pre-departure beverage except Jaden. The plane remained at the gate due to a minor maintenance issue, and passengers were growing restless. Finally, Amanda appeared at his seat. "Did you need something?" she asked, her tone suggesting he was an inconvenience. "Water, please," Jaden requested simply. "We're about to take off soon," she responded dismissively. "Everyone else has received their drinks," Jaden pointed out, maintaining his composure. "I'd appreciate the same courtesy." Amanda's expression hardened. "You people always cause trouble," she said, just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Fine, I'll get you some water." A stunned silence fell over the surrounding seats. The businessman across the aisle, Thomas Blackwell according to Amanda's earlier address, looked up from his newspaper with a frown. The elderly woman in 1D turned around, her expression a mixture of shock and indignation. Jaden felt a familiar heat rise in his chest, a sensation he'd experienced countless times throughout his life, from elementary school classrooms to corporate boardrooms. He took a deep breath, centering himself. His journey to billionaire status had been paved with moments like these. Growing up in Chicago's South Side after losing both parents by the age of 12, he'd fought through poverty, prejudice, and a system designed for him to fail. He had built Harris Innovations from nothing, coding his first algorithm in a public library because he couldn't afford a computer, sleeping on friends' couches while pitching to investors who often couldn't see past the color of his skin. Each rejection and slight had only fueled his determination. And now, despite his success, despite the fact that he could buy this entire airline if he wanted to, he was still subjected to the same bigotry he'd faced his entire life. Jaden quietly pulled out his phone and sent a text to Maya. "Might need some assistance with Delta Flight 3762. Flight attendant creating hostile environment. Documented discrimination." Within seconds, his phone buzzed with her reply, on it. "Contacting airline management now." Thomas Blackwell across the aisle caught Jaden's eye and gave him a subtle nod of solidarity. The quiet support from a stranger was unexpected, and Jaden nodded back in acknowledgement. He hadn't built his empire by making scenes or demanding special treatment, but rather through strategic action and knowing when to deploy his resources. This situation would be no different. Amanda returned several minutes later, practically slamming a plastic cup of water onto Jaden's tray table. The water sloshed over the sides, creating a small puddle that threatened to drip onto his lap. Rather than apologize or offer a napkin, she turned away without a word. Jaden carefully moved the cup and reached into his bag for a tissue to dab at the spill. He pulled out his laptop, a custom-designed ultralight model that contained proprietary information about his company's latest project. This trip to San Francisco wasn't just any business meeting, he was finalizing the acquisition of Nexus Technologies, a rival firm whose quantum computing advances would complement Harris Innovations' AI systems perfectly. The $4 billion deal had been months in the making, with the final signing scheduled for tomorrow morning. As he opened his laptop to review the acquisition documents one last time, Amanda passed by with drinks for the next cabin. Her elbow accidentally knocked into his tray table, sending the water cup flying directly onto his keyboard. Water splashed across the device, immediately causing the screen to flicker. "Oh!" Amanda exclaimed with exaggerated surprise that didn't reach her eyes. "You should be more careful about where you put your things." The aisle needs to stay clear. Jayden quickly closed the laptop and turned it upside down, hoping to minimize the damage. His face remained impassive, but inside, alarm bells were ringing. That laptop contained sensitive information that wasn't backed up to any cloud service for security reasons. That was clearly not his fault, came a voice from across the aisle. Thomas Blackwell had witnessed the entire incident and was now fixing Amanda with a stern gaze. "You knocked it over deliberately." "I did no such thing," Amanda replied coldly. "And I'd appreciate if you'd stay out of this, sir." "I know what I saw," Thomas insisted. "At the very least, you owe this gentleman an apology and some napkins." Amanda's lips thinned to a nearly invisible line. "We're very busy preparing for departure. I'm sure he can handle a little water. It's probably not even a real computer anyway." She lowered her voice, but not enough to prevent those nearby from hearing her mutter, "Probably can't afford to replace it anyway." The elderly woman in 1D turned around again, her expression now openly horrified. Several other passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, eyes darting between Amanda and Jayden. Jayden felt his pulse quicken, but his expression remained neutral. He'd spent years perfecting this mask, showing emotion had often been used against him in predominantly white spaces. He'd been called aggressive for showing the same passion a white colleague was praised for, difficult for asking the same questions others were encouraged to ask. So he'd learned to play the game differently, to channel his reactions into strategic action rather than visible emotion. "May I have your employee ID number, please?" Jayden asked quietly. Amanda's eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me?" "Your employee ID number," Jayden repeated calmly. "I'd like to file a complaint about your service." "That won't be necessary," Amanda replied, her voice taking on a threatening edge. "In fact, if you continue to be disruptive, I'll have to ask security to remove you from the flight." A young woman 2 rows behind Jayden had her phone out, angled discreetly to record the interaction. Others were watching with undisguised interest now, the pre-flight mundanity forgotten in the face of this unfolding drama. "I don't believe I'm being disruptive," Jayden said. "I'm simply requesting your employee identification after you deliberately spilled water on my property and made discriminatory comments." Amanda leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that only Jayden could hear. "Know your place," she hissed before straightening up and announcing more loudly, "I'm going to have to ask you to calm down, sir, or I'll be forced to take action." The plane had been delayed on the tarmac for nearly 30 minutes now due to the maintenance issue, creating an uncomfortably captive environment for this confrontation. The captain's voice came over the intercom, informing passengers they were still waiting for clearance and apologizing for the delay. Jayden noticed Amanda speaking into her phone at the front of the cabin, glancing back at him repeatedly. A few minutes later, 3 airline security officers began making their way down the aisle toward his seat. The other passengers watched with a mixture of concern and curiosity as the officers approached. The lead officer, a tall black man with a serious expression, stood beside Jayden's seat. His name badge read, Michael Johnson. "Sir, we've received a complaint about disruptive behavior," Officer Johnson stated professionally, though his eyes conveyed something different, a subtle recognition, perhaps even respect. Before Jayden could respond, Amanda stepped forward, her expression triumphant. "This passenger has been aggressive and threatening," she claimed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "He's been causing trouble since he boarded and needs to be removed from the flight immediately." Several voices rose in protest simultaneously. "That is absolutely false," declared the elderly woman in 1D, turning fully in her seat. "I've been watching this whole situation. She's been treating this young man horribly from the moment he sat down. She deliberately spilled water on his computer," Thomas added firmly. "I saw the whole thing." Officer Johnson's expression remained professional, but his eyes flickered between the passengers and Amanda, taking in the situation. "Ma'am," he addressed Amanda, "could you please step aside so I can speak with this passenger?" Amanda looked shocked that her version of events was being questioned. "He needs to be removed right now," she insisted. He doesn't belong in this section anyway. At that moment, something clicked in Officer Johnson's eyes as he looked more carefully at Jayden. Recognition dawned on his face, the kind that comes when you suddenly realize you're in the presence of someone whose face you've seen in magazines or news broadcasts. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass, please?" Officer Johnson asked, his tone noticeably more respectful. Jayden calmly produced his boarding pass and ID. As Officer Johnson examined them, he also discreetly showed him his platinum frequent flyer card, which indicated he had accumulated over 2 million miles with the airline. Officer Johnson nodded slightly and stepped away to speak quietly into his radio. While he was doing this, the young woman who had been recording approached the officers. "I have video of what actually happened," she said, holding up her phone. "She's been singling him out since boarding." Thomas stood up as well. "I've been recording since she spilled the water," he added, showing his own phone. "And I've already sent it to customer service." Amanda's face had begun to pale as she realized the situation wasn't unfolding as she'd expected. "This is ridiculous," she sputtered. "He was being disruptive and—" She was interrupted by Officer Johnson, who had returned from his radio conversation. "Ms. Pearson, please step aside," he said firmly. "We need to handle this situation differently." "What do you mean?" "He needs to be removed," Amanda insisted, her voice rising. "That won't be necessary," came a new voice from the front of the cabin. A woman in an airline management uniform had boarded the plane and was making her way toward them. Her badge identified her as Lisa Wright, cabin service supervisor. "Amanda," Lisa said, her expression grim, "I need to speak with you privately. Now." The atmosphere in the cabin had changed dramatically. Passengers who had initially tried to ignore the situation were now openly watching. Some had their phones out, recording or typing rapidly. Social media was already buzzing with fragments of the story. As Amanda followed Lisa toward the galley, clearly confused by this turn of events, Officer Johnson leaned down slightly toward Jayden. "Mr. Harris," he said quietly, "I apologize for the disturbance. The captain would like to speak with you when it's convenient." Jayden nodded, maintaining his composure despite the turmoil around him. His phone buzzed with a text from Maya, airline CEO aware of situation. Regional director en route to gate. Damage control initiated. The confrontation had escalated beyond anything Amanda could have anticipated when she decided to target a passenger based solely on his appearance. She had no idea that in just a few minutes, she would be the one escorted off the plane. The cabin hummed with tension as Lisa Wright and Amanda disappeared into the galley. Passengers exchanged glances, some typing furiously on their phones, others leaning across the aisle to whisper theories about what was happening. Officer Johnson and his two colleagues remained stationed near Jayden's seat, no longer as potential enforcers but almost as a protective detail. Thomas Blackwell rose from his seat and approached the officers, showing them something on his phone. "I've got clear footage of her deliberately spilling water on his computer and making discriminatory comments," he explained. "She said, and I quote, 'You people always cause trouble,' and suggested he couldn't afford to replace his laptop." Officer Johnson nodded grimly as he viewed the footage. "Thank you, sir. This will be included in our report." The plane's intercom crackled to life, and the captain's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds speaking. I want to personally apologize to Mr. Jayden Harris for the unprofessional treatment he has experienced on our flight today. Mr. Harris, on behalf of the entire airline, please accept our deepest apologies. We are addressing this situation immediately." A ripple of whispers spread through the cabin as passengers processed this information. "Jayden Harris," someone murmured. "The Jayden Harris? The tech billionaire?" Recognition dawned on faces throughout the cabin. Jayden Harris was not just any successful businessman, he was a legend in the tech industry, a self-made billionaire whose face had graced the covers of Fortune, Forbes, and Time magazines. His revolutionary AI platforms had transformed industries from healthcare to finance, and his philanthropic foundation had funded STEM education for thousands of underprivileged youth. As the murmurs spread, Jayden remained still, his expression neutral. This was far from the first time he'd faced discrimination, and each instance brought back memories of all the others, a tapestry of prejudice that had followed him despite his success, or perhaps because of it. He remembered the first major investor meeting for Harris Innovations, arriving early to set up his presentation only to be directed to the maintenance closet because the receptionist assumed he was there to fix the projector. He recalled being asked for multiple forms of ID when entering his own building after hours, while his white colleagues simply nodded at security. The countless times he'd been denied loans despite a perfect credit score and a solid business plan, until he'd finally found a black loan officer who gave him his first break. Each memory was a small cut, and together they formed a wound that never fully healed. Yet each instance had also strengthened his resolve to succeed not just for himself, but for every black entrepreneur who would come after him. The young woman who had been recording, a college-aged passenger named Zoe Taylor, had already uploaded her video to social media with the caption, "Watch flight attendant racially profile and assault tech billionaire Jayden Harris, then try to have him removed from the plane. #FlyingWhileBlack #Justice for Jayden." Within minutes, the video had thousands of views and was being shared across multiple platforms. Comments were flooding in, with users expressing outrage at Amanda's behavior and support for Jayden. The airline's social media accounts were being inundated with angry messages demanding action. In the corporate offices of Atlantic Airways, the PR team was scrambling. Emergency meetings were being called, statements drafted and redrafted. The CEO had already been briefed and was personally monitoring the situation. This was rapidly evolving from an isolated incident into a potential PR catastrophe. Back on the plane, Officer Johnson received a message through his earpiece. He nodded and approached Jayden. "Mr. Harris, the Regional Director of Customer Experience would like to board the aircraft to speak with you personally, if that's acceptable to you," he said. Jayden considered for a moment, then nodded. "That's fine." As they waited, Thomas Blackwell extended his hand to Jayden. "Thomas Blackwell, Meridian Ventures. I've actually been hoping to meet you for years, though certainly not under these circumstances." Jayden shook his hand. "Appreciate your speaking up. Not everyone would." "It was the least I could do," Thomas replied. "I've seen this kind of thing too many times to stay silent anymore. Actually, my firm has been following your work in quantum encryption. Impressive doesn't begin to cover it." Their conversation was interrupted as Lisa Wright emerged from the galley, followed by Amanda whose face was now ashen. Behind them came a distinguished-looking man in a crisp airline executive uniform, Bradley Wilson, the regional director. Lisa approached Jayden's seat. "Mr. Harris, I cannot begin to express our deep regret for what you've experienced today. We have a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind, and I assure you this matter is being taken with the utmost seriousness." Bradley Wilson stepped forward. "Mr. Harris, I'm Bradley Wilson, Regional Director for Atlantic Airways. The CEO has asked me to personally ensure that this situation is handled appropriately and to extend his sincere apologies." Meanwhile, Amanda stood rigid near the galley, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. She seemed to be processing the reality of her situation, that she had targeted and discriminated against one of the most influential businessmen in America, and it had all been captured on video that was now going viral. Lisa turned to address the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the continued delay. We're making a crew change, and then we'll be on our way shortly." The implication was clear, and passengers exchanged knowing glances. Amanda looked stunned. "A crew change? But she began. "Amanda," Lisa cut her off firmly, "you will be deplaning immediately. Another flight attendant is already on her way to replace you." "You can't be serious," Amanda protested, her voice rising. "Because of him? Do you know how many times I've had to deal with passengers who don't belong in first class trying to?" "That's enough." Lisa snapped with unexpected force. Your comments are inappropriate and against everything our airline stands for. Security will escort you off the aircraft now." Officer Johnson and one of his colleagues moved toward Amanda, whose face flushed with humiliation and anger. "This is reverse discrimination," she declared loudly. "I was just doing my job, maintaining standards, and now I'm being punished because he's wealthy, successful, black," the elderly woman in 1D supplied coldly. "Go ahead, finish that sentence. We'd all like to hear exactly what you mean." Amanda fell silent, seeming to finally grasp the severity of her situation. As the security officers guided her toward the exit, she glanced back at Jayden with a mixture of shock and resentment. Jayden met her gaze steadily, his expression revealing nothing of the complex emotions beneath the surface. In that moment, the power dynamic had completely reversed. The woman who had tried to use her authority to humiliate him was now being removed from her position, while he remained exactly where he belonged. As Amanda disappeared down the jet bridge, a collective exhale seemed to pass through the cabin. Bradley Wilson approached Jayden again. "Mr. Harris, is there anything we can do to make the remainder of your journey more comfortable? We'd be honored to upgrade you to our private suite cabin on your return flight, and of course, there will be no charge for today's travel." "That won't be necessary," Jayden replied evenly. "I just want to reach San Francisco on time for my meeting tomorrow. And perhaps a dry laptop," he added with the faintest hint of wry humor. "Of course," Bradley nodded earnestly. "We'll have a replacement device waiting for you upon landing, top of the line, I assure you. And our technical team will do everything possible to recover the data from your current laptop." As the executives continued their damage control efforts, Jayden's phone buzzed with a call. The screen displayed Alicia Chen, Nexus Technologies CEO. The woman he was traveling to San Francisco to meet with about the acquisition. The power shift was complete. What had begun as yet another instance of discrimination had transformed into a demonstration of the influence Jayden now wielded, not just because of his wealth, but because of the community that had rallied around him when they witnessed injustice. For the first time since boarding, Jayden allowed himself a small smile. Perhaps this incident would lead to real change, not just for him, but for everyone who had ever been judged by the color of their skin rather than the content of their character. As Amanda was escorted through the terminal, her face burning with humiliation, the dynamics on the plane continued to evolve. Bradley Wilson was now personally attending to Jayden, ensuring that every aspect of his experience would be impeccable from this point forward. "Mr. Harris, I've just spoken with our CEO, and he would like to speak with you directly, if you're willing," Bradley said, offering his personal phone. Jayden took the device and had a brief, cordial conversation with Atlantic Airways chief executive, Jonathan Pierce. The other passengers watched with increasing interest as they began to fully comprehend who Jayden was and the significance of what they had witnessed. "I appreciate your personal attention to this matter," Jayden said into the phone. "Yes, I understand. No, I don't believe a press statement is necessary at this time. What would be more meaningful is substantive action. Yes, company-wide training would be a good start." As Jayden handed the phone back to Bradley, the replacement flight attendant arrived. Keisha Marshall, a poised black woman in her 30s, entered the cabin with a warm professionalism that immediately changed the atmosphere. She approached Jayden with a respectful smile. "Mr. Harris, I'm Keisha Marshall. I'll be taking over for the remainder of the flight. Is there anything I can get for you right away?" As she spoke, a flash of recognition crossed her face. "I'm sorry, but, are you the Jayden Harris who founded the Future Tech Foundation?" Jayden nodded, somewhat surprised by the question. Keisha's professional demeanor briefly gave way to genuine emotion. "Sir, I need to thank you personally. Your foundation's STEM scholarship paid for my entire education at Howard University. I wouldn't be here without that support." The coincidence created a powerful moment of connection that wasn't lost on the other passengers. Thomas Blackwell nodded appreciatively, and the elderly woman in 1D dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "I'm glad to hear that," Jaden replied warmly. That's exactly why we created the foundation. As Keisha continued her duties, preparing the cabin for the now-delayed departure, Bradley Wilson addressed all the passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Atlantic Airways, I want to apologize for the delay and disruption to your journey today. As a token of our appreciation for your patience, every passenger on this flight will receive a travel voucher for a future flight. We expect to begin boarding shortly and will be expediting our arrival in San Francisco to make up time. Have you ever witnessed discrimination like Jaden experienced? Comment number 1 if you believe Amanda deserved to be removed from the flight, or number 2 if you think the situation was handled unfairly. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of justice being served. What would you have done if you were in Thomas Blackwell's position? Would you have spoken up, or stayed quiet? The consequences of choosing to be a bystander or an ally can change someone's entire experience, as you'll see in what happens next. Meanwhile, the social media storm was intensifying. Hashtag Justice for Jaden and hashtag Flying While Black were trending nationwide. The video had been viewed over 1 million times in less than half an hour, with news outlets beginning to pick up the story. Atlantic Airways stock had already dropped 3 points as investors anticipated public backlash. In the corporate headquarters, the PR team was in crisis mode. Draft statements were being prepared, diversity consultants were being called in, and emergency board meetings were being scheduled. What had begun as one flight attendant's prejudice was now threatening to become a defining moment for the entire airline. Back on the plane, Jaden took the moment of relative calm to check his messages. Maya had sent multiple updates. Video at 2M views and climbing. Atlantic Airways CEO wants to discuss anti-bias initiative with you. Nexus Tech Board watching situation closely, CEO Alicia Chen called, seems supportive. Interview requests from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, Bloomberg. Jaden sighed quietly. This was exactly the kind of attention he typically avoided. He had built his reputation on his innovations and business acumen, not on being the face of racial incidents. Yet he also recognized the platform this moment had created, a chance to address systemic issues that affected countless others who didn't have his resources or influence. As the plane finally began to taxi toward the runway, nearly an hour behind schedule, Bradley Wilson returned to Jaden's seat. Mr. Harris, I wanted to inform you that Ms. Pearson has been suspended pending a full investigation. We've also been made aware that this may not be an isolated incident. Several passengers have come forward with similar experiences. Jaden nodded thoughtfully. That doesn't surprise me. These situations rarely are isolated. We're committed to addressing this at a systemic level, Bradley assured him. The CEO mentioned you had some suggestions about training programs. My foundation has developed effective anti-bias training specifically for customer service industries, Jaden explained. I'd be happy to have my team share those resources with your HR department. As they spoke, Thomas Blackwell listened with interest. When Bradley moved away, he leaned across the aisle. You know, what happened today is exactly why I've been pushing my own company to diversify our investment portfolio. Too many brilliant entrepreneurs of color get overlooked because the venture capital world is so homogeneous. This sparked a conversation that caught the attention of nearby passengers. Soon, a remarkable thing began to happen. In the confined space of the first-class cabin, strangers began to engage in a frank discussion about race, privilege, and responsibility. The elderly woman in 1D introduced herself as Doris Fuller, a retired history professor. I've lived through the civil rights movement, she shared. And while we've come so far, days like today remind me how far we still have to go. Zoe, the young woman who had recorded the incident, joined in. My video has over 2 million views already. People are furious about how you were treated, Mr. Harris. Keisha served drinks with impeccable professionalism, ensuring every passenger received equal attention and courtesy. The contrast with Amanda's behavior was striking and not lost on anyone in the cabin. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Jayden found himself at the center of an impromptu forum on racial equity. It wasn't a role he had sought out, but it was one he was uniquely positioned to fill. His journey from the south side of Chicago to the pinnacle of the tech world gave him a perspective that bridged different experiences in American life. The most insidious aspect of discrimination isn't always the overt bigotry, he explained to the engaged passengers. It's the thousand small cuts, the extra questions, the additional scrutiny, the benefit of the doubt never extended. It's exhausting in a way that's hard to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. I've been trying to become more aware of that. As a white man, there are so many things I simply don't have to think about when I move through the world. Awareness is the first step, Doris added. When I was younger, I'm ashamed to admit I might have had thoughts similar to that flight attendant's. It took genuine relationships with people different from myself to change my perspective. The plane had become an unlikely space for connection and conversation, a temporary community formed in the crucible of crisis. People who might never have spoken to each other were now engaged in meaningful dialogue about one of America's most persistent challenges. Jayden's phone continued to buzz with notifications, but he had set it aside to fully engage with this unexpected moment. There would be time for press statements and business meetings later. Right now, something more important was happening, real human connection across lines that typically divided. As the discussion continued, Keisha approached with a message from the cockpit. Mr. Harris, the captain wanted me to inform you that we've been given priority landing status in San Francisco. We'll actually arrive ahead of schedule despite our delayed departure. This was another small indicator of how completely the situation had transformed. The same airline that had nearly removed him from the flight was now expediting his journey. The irony wasn't lost on Jayden or the other passengers. The tables had turned in more ways than one. Amanda, who had wielded her authority as a weapon, was now facing professional consequences and public scrutiny. Atlantic Airways, which had initially failed to prevent discrimination, was now scrambling to make amends. And Jayden, who had boarded the plane hoping for a quiet journey, had inadvertently become the catalyst for a moment of collective reckoning. As the plane continued its journey westward, the conversations in the cabin deepened. People shared personal stories, asked thoughtful questions, and listened with genuine interest. It was a rare glimpse of what might be possible if more Americans created space for authentic dialogue about race and privilege. For Jayden, it was a bittersweet reminder of both how far he had come and how little some things had changed. Despite all his success, despite the power he now wielded, he still wasn't immune to the prejudice that had followed him his entire life. The difference now was that he had the platform and resources to potentially create change that would benefit others. As the plane began its descent into San Francisco, Jayden looked out the window at the city below, a place built on innovation and the promise of new beginnings. Perhaps this incident, painful as it was, might be the beginning of something important. Not just for him, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel they didn't belong in spaces they had every right to occupy. As Amanda Pearson was escorted through the terminal, her career effectively over, Jayden Harris gazed out the airplane window at the clouds below. The cabin had settled into a strange new rhythm, part normal flight, part impromptu community forum. The incident had broken down the usual barriers between strangers, creating an unusual space for connection. For Jayden, however, Amanda's words had reopened old wounds. As conversations continued around him, his mind drifted to other moments when he'd been told, explicitly or implicitly, that he didn't belong. He remembered his first major investor meeting 8 years ago. Harris Innovations was still operating out of a converted garage in Chicago's South Side. He'd secured the meeting through sheer persistence, calling the venture capital firm daily until they finally agreed to give him 15 minutes. He'd arrived an hour early, dressed in a suit he couldn't afford, carrying a prototype of his AI interface that would eventually revolutionize the industry. "The maintenance closet is down the hall," the receptionist had said without looking up when he entered. "The projector in the Hemingway room needs fixing before the important meeting at 10. "I am the 10 o'clock meeting," he'd replied quietly. The look of disbelief on her face had said everything. The memory shifted to 3 years later, after his first round of successful funding. He'd purchased a modest office building in downtown Chicago to house his growing team. Working late one night, he'd stepped out to grab dinner and returned to find security blocking his entrance. "ID," the guard had demanded gruffly. When Jayden provided his company badge, the man had scrutinized it with suspicious eyes. "I need additional identification." "I'm the CEO," Jayden had explained. "Sure you are," the guard had replied with a smirk. "Additional ID, or you're not entering." None of the white executives had ever been asked for additional identification. Then there was the bank, 5 loan rejections despite a perfect credit score and a business plan that had Harvard MBAs calling it brilliant. The 6th bank had a black loan officer who recognized the pattern immediately and approved him on the spot. "Their loss," the man had said, shaking Jayden's hand firmly. "Our gain." These memories and dozens more like them had shaped him, forced him to work harder, be more prepared, control his emotions more carefully than his white counterparts. Each instance had added another brick to the psychological armor he'd built around himself. A gentle voice pulled him back to the present. "Mr. Harris?" It was Keisha, the replacement flight attendant. "Would you like a fresh coffee?" "Thank you," he replied, accepting the cup with a genuine smile. "I just wanted to say again how much your foundation's work meant to me," Keisha continued quietly. "The scholarship didn't just pay for my education, it gave me permission to believe I belonged in spaces I'd been told weren't for people like me." Her words struck a chord. That was precisely why he'd established the Future Tech Foundation after his first billion, to create pathways for talented young people of color who faced the same barriers he had. "That's exactly what we hoped for," Jayden replied. "Not just financial support, but psychological permission." Thomas Blackwell, who had been engaged in conversation with Doris Fuller, turned toward them. "I couldn't help overhearing. My daughter benefited from a similar program, not yours specifically, but one with the same philosophy. It changed her trajectory completely." "Is she in tech?" Jayden asked. "Quantum computing research at MIT," Thomas replied with obvious pride. "But she might never have considered it without specific encouragement. There were so few people who looked like her in the field." The conversation expanded to include Zoe and several other passengers who had been listening. What had begun as a discriminatory incident was transforming into a meaningful dialogue about representation, opportunity, and the subtle ways exclusion operated in American society. Meanwhile, Jayden's phone buzzed with an incoming call from the airline CEO again. He excused himself and took the call. "Mr. Harris, Jonathan Pierce again. I wanted to update you personally. We've initiated an immediate review of all customer service protocols. More importantly, we'd like to offer compensation for your experience today." "That's not necessary," Jayden replied. "We insist. We'd like to provide you with lifetime platinum status and—" "What would be more meaningful," Jayden interrupted gently, "would be company-wide anti-bias training. My foundation has developed effective programs specifically for customer service industries. I'd be happy to have my team collaborate with yours." There was a moment of silence before Pierce responded. "That's actually a much better solution. We'd be honored to work with your foundation on this. Could we perhaps discuss naming the initiative after you?" "That won't be necessary," Jayden said firmly. "The goal isn't publicity, it's meaningful change." As he ended the call, Jayden noticed Thomas watching him with newfound respect. "That was impressive," the venture capitalist commented. "Most people would have taken the perks and moved on." "Perks don't create systemic change," Jayden replied simply. Doris leaned forward in her seat. "You know, I've been teaching American history for 40 years, and the pattern remains the same. Real change never comes from individual accommodations, it requires structural transformation." The conversation deepened as the flight continued. Passengers shared personal experiences with discrimination, discussed the challenges of creating inclusive environments, and debated the most effective pathways to equity. It was the kind of dialogue rarely heard in public spaces, honest, vulnerable, and constructive. For Jayden, it was both exhausting and energizing. Each story resonated with his own experiences, yet each also offered new perspectives he hadn't considered. The mental and emotional labor of navigating these conversations was significant, but so was the potential impact. Keisha moved efficiently through the cabin, providing exemplary service to every passenger regardless of appearance or status. Her professionalism stood in stark contrast to Amanda's behavior, a living demonstration of how things could and should be. As the discussion continued, Jayden's phone lit up with another message from Maya. Amanda Pearson gave interview to News One Network, claiming reverse discrimination. Backfiring badly as more videos emerge from other passengers showing pattern of behavior with minority passengers. Airline stock down 7% now. He showed the message to Thomas, who shook his head in disbelief. Some people never learn, do they? Instead of acknowledging the mistake and growing from it, they double down. It's a common response, Doris noted. Defensiveness often masks an inability to reconcile one's self-image with evidence of harmful behavior. Zoe, who had been monitoring social media on her phone, chimed in. The video has over 5 million views now. People are sharing their own similar experiences with the hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack. It's become much bigger than just this incident. Jayden felt a complex mix of emotions. He hadn't asked to become the face of yet another racial incident, yet he recognized the platform it created for important conversations. His primary focus remained the Nexus Technologies acquisition, a deal that would combine their quantum computing advances with his AI systems to create technology that could help solve previously intractable problems in climate science, medicine, and energy. His phone buzzed again with a text from Alicia Chen, Nexus Technologies CEO, watching what's happening. Take all the time you need. Deal will wait. Respect how you're handling this. The message offered unexpected reassurance. Jayden had worried the publicity might complicate the negotiations, but it seemed to have had the opposite effect. Thomas noticed his expression. Good news. The CEO I'm meeting in San Francisco, Jayden explained. She's being understanding about the situation. Alicia Chen? Thomas asked. When Jayden nodded, Thomas smiled. I know her well. Brilliant woman. She's been wanting to work with you for years. You know everyone, don't you? Jayden observed with a hint of amusement. Occupational hazard of 20 years in venture capital, Thomas replied. Though I must admit, meeting you under these circumstances is both unfortunate and fortunate. I've been hoping to discuss potential collaboration between our firms. As they began to explore possible business synergies, Doris engaged Zoe in a conversation about generational perspectives on racism. The first-class cabin had transformed into a unique space where strangers from different backgrounds were having the kind of honest conversations about race that rarely happened in American public life. Keisha approached again. Mr. Harris, the captain asked me to inform you that we're about an hour from landing. Also, there's apparently quite a media presence at San Francisco International awaiting our arrival. Jayden nodded thoughtfully. The story had clearly exploded while they were in the air. He would need to decide how to engage with it, whether to make a statement, give interviews, or simply proceed with his business as planned. What he couldn't have anticipated was how this incident would connect to his past in ways that would further transform his future. The discriminatory moment that had reopened old wounds would also, paradoxically, create new opportunities for healing, not just for him, but for many others. As the plane began its initial descent towards San Francisco, Jayden Harris found himself at another pivotal moment in a life defined by overcoming barriers. This time, however, he wasn't facing them alone. The "Fasten Seatbelt" signs illuminated as the plane began its descent towards San Francisco, but the conversations in the first-class cabin showed no signs of winding down. What had begun as an ugly incident of discrimination had catalyzed something rare and valuable, genuine dialogue across racial, generational, and socio-economic lines. Doris Fuller, the retired history professor, was sharing her perspective with a captivated group. "I grew up in Alabama in the 50s, she explained. My parents taught me beliefs about race that I now recognize were deeply harmful. It took decades of unlearning, and I'm still working on it every day." "What changed your mind initially?" Zoe asked, genuinely curious. "A black colleague at the university challenged me, gently but firmly, when I made an insensitive comment. Instead of dismissing me, she invited me to lunch once a week for a semester. Those conversations transformed my understanding completely." Jayden listened thoughtfully. Doris's story highlighted something he'd observed repeatedly: meaningful change rarely came from public shaming, but often emerged from relationships that created space for growth and learning. The captain's voice came over the intercom: "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final approach to San Francisco International Airport. We should be on the ground in about 20 minutes. The weather is clear and 65 degrees. We apologize again for our delayed departure and thank you for your patience." The announcement created a brief pause in the conversations, a moment for passengers to collect their thoughts after the intensity of the discussions. Keisha moved efficiently through the cabin, ensuring everyone was prepared for landing. Thomas Blackwell turned to Jayden. "We haven't had a chance to discuss your foundation's work in depth. I'm particularly interested in your apprenticeship program for young coders from underserved communities." "It's one of our most successful initiatives," Jayden explained. "Traditional hiring practices screen out so much talent because they prioritize credentials over capabilities. Our program identifies gifted coders who might not have formal education but demonstrate exceptional aptitude. The results speak for themselves," Thomas noted. "Some of the most innovative features in your AI systems came from those apprentices, if I recall correctly." "Absolutely. Diverse perspectives lead to better solutions. It's not just a moral imperative, it's good business." Their conversation was interrupted as Keisha approached. "Mr. Harris, there's something I've been meaning to tell you," she said quietly. "Before becoming a flight attendant, I was one of the students in your foundation's first coding camp in Chicago. I didn't pursue programming ultimately, but the experience gave me confidence that changed my life." The coincidence was extraordinary, another thread connecting Jayden's past efforts to the present moment. "The South Side Summer Program?" he asked. Keisha nodded, her eyes bright with emotion. 10 years ago. I was 16 and had never touched a computer before that summer. I remember that program well. I taught some of those sessions myself," Jayden said, genuinely moved by the connection. "You did," Keisha confirmed. "You told us that technology wasn't just for people who looked a certain way or came from certain backgrounds. You said the future belonged to anyone brave enough to create it." The other passengers listened to this exchange with evident fascination. The random nature of their being on this particular flight together, witnessing this full-circle moment, created a powerful sense of interconnectedness. "That's incredible," Zoe said. "Like, what are the odds?" Out of all the flight attendants they could have called in to replace Amanda, they chose someone whose life you had already impacted. "Some might call it coincidence," Doris observed with a gentle smile. "Others might see something more meaningful at work." As the plane descended through the clouds, the unlikely community that had formed in the first-class cabin continued to deepen their connections. Phone numbers and business cards were exchanged. Promises to stay in touch were made with genuine intention rather than mere politeness. Thomas handed Jayden his card. "I'd like to discuss potential investment in your foundation's work. Not as charity, but as impact investing. The returns on developing underutilized talent pools are substantial." "I'd welcome that conversation," Jayden replied, tucking the card into his wallet. Zoe approached somewhat shyly. "Mr. Harris, I'm a computer science major at Berkeley. I'd love to apply for your summer internship program if that's okay." "Absolutely. Here's my assistant's contact information," Jayden said, writing on the back of his own business card. "Tell her I suggested you reach out." Even passengers who had initially remained silent began to engage, drawn into the authentic connections forming around them. A Japanese businessman shared his experiences with different forms of discrimination in international contexts. A Latina executive discussed the intersections of race and gender in corporate America. Each contribution added another dimension to the collective understanding. As the plane's wheels touched down on the runway, there was an almost palpable sense of reluctance for this unique experience to end. The confined space of the aircraft had created the conditions for a kind of dialogue that rarely occurred in everyday life, one where people actually listened to understand rather than waiting to respond. Keisha made a final announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to San Francisco International Airport. Local time is 2:15 p.m. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until the captain has turned off the seatbelt sign." She paused, then added something unscripted. "It has been my genuine honor to serve on this flight today. Sometimes difficult moments create opportunities for growth and connection. I believe we've experienced that together." A spontaneous round of applause broke out among the passengers. It wasn't just for Keisha's service, but for the collective experience they had shared, a recognition of something valuable that had emerged from an initially ugly situation. As the plane taxied to the gate, Jaden received another text from Maya, major media presence at arrival gate. "At least 6 news crews. How do you want to handle?" He considered his options carefully. The last thing he wanted was to become the face of yet another racial incident in America. At the same time, he recognized the platform this moment provided to address important issues. "I'd like to exit with the other passengers," he replied. "No special treatment. We'll make brief statement if approached." Thomas, who had observed him reading the message, offered his perspective. "For what it's worth, your voice on this issue would be significant. You speak from a position of undeniable accomplishment, which makes it harder for critics to dismiss your experiences." Doris nodded in agreement. Sometimes the most reluctant spokespeople are the most effective precisely because they didn't seek the spotlight. Jaden appreciated their insights. Throughout his career, he had focused on letting his work speak for itself rather than engaging in public discourse about race. Perhaps that had been a missed opportunity. As the seatbelt sign turned off and passengers began to gather their belongings, there was none of the usual rushing to exit. Instead, people continued their conversations, exchanged final contact information, and expressed genuine appreciation for the connections they had formed. Keisha stood at the front of the cabin, personally thanking each passenger as they prepared to depart. When Jaden approached, she spoke softly so only he could hear. "Thank you for showing me what dignity looks like in the face of disrespect. That lesson was as valuable as the coding camp." Her words resonated deeply. Throughout his life, Jaden had made conscious choices about how to respond to discrimination, not because he didn't feel anger or hurt, but because he refused to let those emotions dictate his actions or define his identity. As the door to the jetway opened, the passengers of Flight 3762 prepared to re-enter the wider world, carrying with them the unexpected gifts of their shared journey. New perspectives, meaningful connections, and perhaps most importantly, a lived experience of how dialogue across difference could create understanding rather than division. What none of them could have anticipated was how the ripple effects of this single incident would continue to expand, touching lives far beyond those present on the plane and creating changes more significant than anyone could have predicted. The moment Jaden Harris stepped into the terminal at San Francisco International Airport, the landscape shifted dramatically. At least 6 news crews were positioned strategically near the gate, cameras ready, microphones extended. Passengers exiting ahead of him had already alerted the waiting journalists to his imminent arrival. "Mr. Harris, can you comment on the incident aboard your flight today? What was your reaction to the flight attendant's behavior? Will you be taking legal action against the airline?" The questions came rapid fire from all directions. Despite having mentally prepared for this moment, the intensity of the media presence was jarring. Jaden paused, taking a deep breath before responding. "I'll make a brief statement," he said calmly, and the journalists immediately clustered around him. Thomas Blackwell and Doris Fuller had exited just before him and now positioned themselves supportively on either side. Other passengers from the flight formed a loose semicircle behind him, creating an unusual tableau of solidarity. "What happened today is unfortunately not unique," Jayden began. "Many Americans experience similar treatment daily without cameras present or viral videos to validate their experiences. What is unique is the conversation that developed afterward, a genuine dialogue about race, privilege, and responsibility that I hope can continue beyond this incident." His measured response, focusing on the broader context rather than personal grievance, caught some of the journalists off guard. They had expected either angry denunciation or the carefully scripted non-answers typical of public figures in controversial situations. "Will you be suing the airline?" one reporter pressed. "No," Jayden replied firmly. "What I will be doing is working with Atlantic Airways on implementing comprehensive anti-bias training for all their staff. Litigation creates headlines, education creates change." As he fielded a few more questions with the same thoughtful composure, his phone buzzed with an incoming call from Maya. Excusing himself from the media scrum, he answered. "You're watching?" he asked. "Yes," Maya confirmed. "You're handling it perfectly. But there's something else you should know. Amanda Pearson gave an interview to Conservative Daily about 20 minutes ago. She's claiming she was treated unfairly and was just maintaining standards. She specifically said you were playing the race card." Jayden sighed. "Not unexpected. That's not all," Maya continued. 3 other passengers have come forward with videos showing her treating other minority passengers dismissively on previous flights. 2 black women and an elderly Asian man. The airline is in full crisis mode now. Even as they spoke, Jayden could see reporters receiving updates on their phones, their expressions indicating that the story was evolving rapidly. "What about the Nexus meeting?" he asked, refocusing on his primary purpose in San Francisco. Alicia Chen called again. "She's been watching everything unfold and says she completely understands if you need to reschedule. But she also mentioned she's still ready to meet today if you are." "Tell her I'll be there as planned," Jayden decided. This situation shouldn't derail a deal that's been months in the making. As he ended the call, Thomas approached. "My driver is waiting outside if you'd like to avoid the main terminals," he offered. "Least I can do after what you've been through." Jayden accepted gratefully. As they made their way through the airport, accompanied by Doris and several other passengers who had formed an impromptu protective circle around him, the scale of the media storm became even more apparent. On airport television screens, the incident was already being featured on news networks with the headline, "Black Billionaire Racially Profiled on Flight Attendant Removed." Social media was exploding with commentary. #Justice for Jayden and #FlyingWhileBlack were trending nationally. The video had been viewed over 15 million times and was being shared by celebrities, politicians, and ordinary citizens alike. Atlantic Airways stock had plummeted 9% in just 2 hours. What made this incident particularly powerful in the public consciousness was the clear power reversal. Unlike many viral videos of racial profiling where the target remained disempowered throughout, this story had a dramatically different arc. The flight attendant who had wielded her authority as a weapon found herself removed from the plane, while the passenger she had attempted to humiliate was revealed to be a billionaire tech genius whose innovations were used by millions. This narrative inversion satisfied a deep public hunger for justice rarely seen in similar incidents. It created a rare moment where someone facing discrimination had the resources and position to ensure consequences for the perpetrator. For many viewers, particularly those who had experienced similar treatment without recourse, it provided vicarious satisfaction. Outside the airport, Thomas's driver waited with a luxury SUV. As they settled into the vehicle, Doris turned to Jayden. "I hope you don't mind my saying this, but I think you're in a unique position to advance this conversation in a meaningful way. Your economic success makes it impossible for critics to dismiss your experiences as those of someone playing victim." Jayden nodded thoughtfully. I've generally kept my focus on my work rather than becoming a spokesperson on these issues. But maybe that's been a missed opportunity. Sometimes leadership finds us rather than us seeking it, Doris observed. As they drove toward downtown San Francisco, Jayden received another update from Maya. Amanda's interview was backfiring spectacularly as more videos emerged showing her pattern of behavior with other minority passengers. Her claims of maintaining standards rang hollow when juxtaposed with footage of her warm, accommodating treatment of white passengers compared to her dismissive, often hostile approach to passengers of color. The airline's CEO had announced an immediate investigation and policy review. A statement expressed deep regret for the incident and promised substantial changes to prevent similar situations in the future. Industry analysts were already predicting this could become a pivotal case study in corporate response to racial incidents. Meanwhile, Jayden's company was experiencing unexpected positive attention. Downloads of Harris Innovations' consumer apps had increased 300% in the past hour as people discovered who he was. The company's stock had risen 4 points as investors anticipated increased brand recognition and customer goodwill. The driver pulled up to the entrance of a sleek high-rise in San Francisco's financial district, the headquarters of Nexus Technologies. Thomas and Doris wished Jayden well as he prepared to exit the vehicle. "I have a feeling we'll be seeing each other again," Thomas said, handing Jayden another business card. "Call me when you're ready to discuss that investment in your foundation. And don't forget about my offer to speak to your mentorship program," Doris added. Those young people should hear about the history that preceded their opportunities. Jayden thanked them both sincerely. The connections formed during this crisis felt substantive and genuine, unexpected gifts from an initially painful situation. As he entered the Nexus building, the receptionist recognized him immediately. "Mr. Harris. Ms. Chen is waiting for you in the conference room. She asked me to bring you straight up." In the elevator, Jayden took a moment to center himself. The past few hours had been emotionally and mentally taxing, but he needed to refocus on the business purpose of his trip. The acquisition of Nexus Technologies would combine their quantum computing advances with his AI systems to create technology that could help solve previously intractable problems in climate science, medicine, and energy. When the elevator doors opened, Alicia Chen was waiting personally rather than sending an assistant, a small but significant gesture of respect. "Jayden," she greeted him warmly. "I'm genuinely sorry about what you experienced today. Thank you for still making our meeting." "Some things are too important to postpone," he replied simply. As they walked toward the conference room, Alicia added, "I should mention that our board has been watching how you handled the situation. They were impressed with your composure and leadership. It actually strengthened their confidence in the merger." This was unexpected. Jayden had worried the publicity might complicate the negotiations, but it seemed to have had the opposite effect. "There's something else you should know," Alicia continued, stopping just outside the conference room door. "The reason I was so understanding about today's events is because I've experienced similar situations myself. Not to the same degree, perhaps, but enough to recognize the pattern immediately." As a Chinese-American woman in tech, Alicia had faced her own battles with discrimination and underestimation. This shared experience created another unexpected connection, a foundation of mutual understanding that would prove valuable in the complex negotiations ahead. The media storm continued to rage outside, with commentators, influencers, and ordinary citizens all weighing in on the viral incident. But inside the Nexus conference room, two visionary tech leaders were focused on creating something that transcended the immediate controversy, technology that could help address humanity's most pressing challenges. What neither of them could fully appreciate in that moment was how their partnership, born in part from this shared experience of marginalization, would ultimately create ripples far beyond either of their original visions. 4 hours later, Jayden emerged from Nexus Technologies' headquarters into the golden late afternoon light of San Francisco. The acquisition deal was done, signed, sealed, and on better terms than he had initially hoped for. What had begun as one of the most difficult days of his professional life had transformed into one of the most consequential. Maya was waiting in the car outside, her tablet displaying multiple news sites simultaneously, all featuring the airplane incident prominently. "It's not dying down," she informed him as he settled into the back seat. "If anything, it's growing." The airline stock closed down 12%. "Their CEO has requested an emergency meeting with you tomorrow." Jayden nodded, processing this information. "What's the public response looking like?" "Mostly supportive of you. The videos are pretty unambiguous. Amanda Pearson has gone quiet since her initial interview backfired. Her social media accounts have been deleted." "And our company?" Maya's expression brightened. "That's the surprising part. Our app downloads are up 500%. Stock up 7 points at closing. The foundation website crashed from traffic after people discovered your scholarship programs. We've received over 2,000 donations in the past 3 hours, totaling just over $3 million. This was unexpected collateral benefit from an initially painful situation." Jayden had built his company and foundation focused on the work itself rather than his personal story. He had deliberately maintained a lower public profile than many tech CEOs, preferring to let his innovations speak for themselves. Today's events had thrust him into the spotlight in a way he hadn't sought but now needed to navigate thoughtfully. "There's more," Maya continued, scrolling through her tablet. "You've been invited to appear on 3 major morning shows tomorrow. The governor's office called about the state supplier diversity initiative, and Senator Jackson wants you to testify before the Congressional Committee on Transportation Equity next month." The scope of response was overwhelming. What had begun as a personal incident of discrimination was rapidly expanding into a platform for addressing systemic issues. Jayden felt the weight of this unexpected responsibility settling on his shoulders. "What about the Nexus deal?" Maya asked, changing subjects. "Signed," Jayden replied with satisfaction. And surprisingly, the terms improved. "Alicia Chen and her board were impressed with how I handled today's situation. It created an unexpected connection." "That's fantastic," Maya said with genuine excitement. "This acquisition changes everything for our quantum AI initiative." As they drove toward their hotel, Jayden's phone buzzed with a text from Thomas Blackwell. "Watching your story continue to unfold. My firm is prepared to commit $50 million to your foundation's apprenticeship program whenever you're ready to discuss. No publicity required." Another message followed from Doris Fuller. "My university colleagues are organizing a symposium on corporate responsibility and racial equity. They're hoping you might consider giving the keynote address." Even Zoe had reached out. "Mr. Harris, my post about today now has 22 million views. People are sharing their own stories of discrimination using #JusticeForJayden. You've started something important." The cascade of responses illustrated how thoroughly his reality had shifted in just a few hours. The same heightened visibility that had made him a target for Amanda's discrimination was now amplifying his potential impact on issues he cared deeply about. When they reached the hotel, the manager was waiting personally in the lobby. "Mr. Harris, we've upgraded you to our presidential suite and provided additional security as requested. There are several reporters in the vicinity of the hotel." Maya handled the arrangements efficiently while Jayden retreated to the privacy of the elevator. Once inside his suite, he stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking San Francisco Bay, allowing himself a moment to process the day's events. His phone rang. It was Keisha Marshall, the flight attendant who had replaced Amanda. "Mr. Harris, I hope I'm not overstepping by calling," she began when he answered. "I wanted you to know that Atlantic Airways has asked me to help develop their new training protocols based on today's incident. They're serious about making changes." "That's excellent news," Jayden replied. "Your perspective will be invaluable." "There's something else," Keisha continued. "The videos from the flight have created a conversation within the company about experiences many of us have had but never felt safe discussing. It's like a dam breaking." This was precisely the kind of systemic impact Jayden had hoped might emerge from the individual incident. Real change rarely came from top-down policies alone, but rather from shifts in culture that allowed honest conversations about previously suppressed experiences. After ending the call, Jayden sat down at the suite's desk and began drafting a statement. If he was going to engage with the platform this incident had created, he wanted to do so thoughtfully and strategically. Maya knocked on his door an hour later. The airline's CEO and Chief Diversity Officer are confirmed for breakfast tomorrow at 8. Also, Alicia Chen called. Nexus is issuing a press release about the acquisition tomorrow and wanted to coordinate messaging. Let's move forward with both, Jayden decided. And I've drafted a statement I'd like to release tonight. Nothing elaborate, just my perspective on today's events and the broader context. Maya reviewed the statement, making a few small suggestions before sending it to their communications team. Within 30 minutes, it was released across Harris Innovation's social media channels and sent to major news outlets. The statement was characteristically thoughtful and measured. Rather than focusing on his personal experience or demanding punitive measures against the airline or Amanda Pearson, Jayden highlighted the systemic nature of such incidents and the need for structural changes across industries. He announced a new initiative from his foundation to develop anti-bias training specifically for customer service industries, offered free of charge to any company willing to implement it comprehensively. The response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Industry leaders, celebrities, and ordinary citizens praised his constructive approach. Several major corporations, including two of Atlantic Airways' competitors, immediately expressed interest in the training program. As night fell over San Francisco, Jayden reflected on the extraordinary arc of the day. He had boarded a plane in Atlanta that morning as a successful but relatively private tech executive. He would go to bed in San Francisco as a central figure in a national conversation about race, privilege, and corporate responsibility. The transformation wasn't one he had sought, but now that it had occurred, he recognized both the burden and the opportunity it presented. Throughout his career, he had built technologies that solved complex problems. Perhaps this unexpected platform would allow him to address an even more fundamental challenge: the persistent inequities that shaped American life in ways both obvious and subtle. His phone buzzed with a final message for the night, from his grandmother in Chicago, the woman who had raised him after his parents' deaths. "Saw you on the news. So proud of how you handled yourself. Your mama and daddy would be too. Remember what I always told you, when they go low, you fly high. You're soaring now, baby." The simple message brought unexpected tears to his eyes. Through all the public response, the media attention, and the corporate implications, this personal connection to his roots grounded him in what mattered most. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, meetings with executives, media interviews, and strategic decisions about how to leverage this moment for maximum positive impact. But tonight, Jayden allowed himself to simply acknowledge the journey, from a South Side Chicago kid who couldn't afford a computer to a tech visionary whose response to discrimination was creating ripples of change across corporate America. As he drifted toward sleep, Jayden reflected on how a single moment of bigotry had inadvertently created opportunities for progress that might not have emerged otherwise. It was a bittersweet irony, but one that contained genuine hope for transformation. 1 month later, Jayden Harris stood before the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, his testimony the culmination of a remarkable period of personal and professional transformation. Distinguished members of the committee, he began, his voice steady and assured, "What began as a personal experience of discrimination aboard Flight 3762 has revealed systemic issues that affect countless Americans daily. I appear before you today not seeking punitive measures or personal redress, but to advocate for structural changes that can prevent similar incidents in the future." The packed hearing room listened intently as Jayden outlined a comprehensive framework for addressing bias in the transportation industry, from hiring practices to training protocols, from accountability systems to customer feedback mechanisms. His testimony was grounded not just in his personal experience, but in data, research, and the collective wisdom of experts his foundation had assembled over the preceding weeks. In the month since the incident, much had changed. Amanda Pearson had been formally terminated after Atlantic Airways' investigation revealed a consistent pattern of discriminatory behavior toward minority passengers. The airline had implemented a mandatory training program designed by Jaden's foundation, with Keisha Marshall playing a key role in its development and delivery. The training went beyond superficial diversity workshops to address the underlying psychological and structural factors that enabled bias to persist in corporate environments. Early results were promising, with customer satisfaction scores among minority passengers already showing significant improvement. But the impact extended far beyond a single airline or incident. Thomas Blackwell had made good on his promise, partnering with Jaden to establish a $100 million venture fund specifically for minority entrepreneurs in the tech sector. The fund had already made investments in 12 promising startups that might otherwise have struggled to secure traditional venture capital. Doris Fuller had become an unexpected advocate, speaking to senior groups across the country about recognizing and addressing unconscious bias. Her perspective as someone who had evolved her own thinking over decades resonated particularly with older Americans who sometimes felt defensive or excluded from conversations about racial equity. Keisha Marshall's career had taken a dramatic turn. Her poise and professionalism during the incident, combined with her previous connection to Jaden's foundation, had led to her promotion to flight crew supervisor. More significantly, she had become a sought-after speaker on customer service excellence and inclusive practices, addressing industry conferences and corporate training sessions. Perhaps most consequentially, the merger of Harris Innovations and Nexus Technologies had created a technological powerhouse focused on applying quantum AI to pressing social challenges. Their first major initiative, a platform that allowed users to report and document instances of discrimination in real time, had been downloaded over 3 million times in its first week. The app, called Witness, enabled users to securely record interactions, automatically transcribe conversations, and connect with legal resources if needed. More importantly, it aggregated anonymized data to identify patterns of discriminatory behavior across institutions and locations, creating unprecedented transparency and accountability. As Jaden concluded his congressional testimony, he unveiled a new feature of the platform designed specifically for transportation services. This tool will allow companies to proactively identify problematic patterns before they escalate into incidents like mine, he explained. It transforms individual experiences into collective data that can drive meaningful change. The response from the committee was overwhelmingly positive, with members from both parties expressing support for legislation that would incentivize adoption of such tools across the transportation industry. What had begun as a moment of personal humiliation had evolved into a catalyst for systemic transformation. After the hearing, Jaden was approached by a young black congressional aide who shook his hand with evident emotion. "Mr. Harris, I just wanted to thank you. I've been flying for work every week for 3 years, and what happened to you has happened to me so many times. But now, when I board a flight, I can tell something's different. The training is working." This personal impact meant more to Jaden than all the media attention, business opportunities, and political influence that had emerged from the incident. Real change, experienced by real people, that had always been his ultimate measure of success. As he left the Capitol building, Jaden reflected on how differently this story might have ended if he hadn't possessed the resources, platform, and support system to transform discrimination into opportunity. For every viral video that captured public attention, countless similar incidents occurred without documentation or consequences. That reality had shaped his approach to addressing the issue, not focusing solely on individual bad actors like Amanda Pearson, but on creating systems that could prevent such behavior and protect those who lacked his advantages. The app, the training programs, the investment fund, all were designed to extend the impact beyond his personal experience to benefit others who might never have the platform he did. Back at his hotel, Jaden found an unexpected visitor waiting in the lobby, Zoe Taylor, the young woman who had recorded the original incident on the plane. Now an intern at his foundation, she had flown to Washington to observe his testimony. "That was incredible," she said enthusiastically. "The committee seemed genuinely moved by your presentation. Let's hope it translates into actual policy," Jaden replied. "Emotions fade, legislation lasts." Speaking of lasting impact, Zoe continued, "The Witness app just hit 3.5 million downloads. People are using it for everything from retail interactions to traffic stops. It's creating accountability in spaces where there was none before. Jayden nodded, satisfied but not surprised. He had designed the app with exactly this potential in mind, a tool that could transform individual vulnerability into collective power through the strategic use of technology and data. As they walked toward the car, Jayden received a text from Thomas Blackwell, first investment from our fund already showing promising results. Founder presenting at TechCrunch next month. You available to make an appearance? Another message followed from Doris Fuller, spoke to 300 retired executives yesterday. 20 signed up for mentorship program with minority entrepreneurs. Small steps, but in the right direction. And finally, a message from Alicia Chen, Quantum AI Healthcare Initiative approved by FDA for pilot testing. This could change everything. Each update represented another ripple effect from that moment 1 month ago when Amanda Pearson had looked at him with contempt and said, "You people always cause trouble." The irony wasn't lost on Jayden. Her attempt to put him in his place had instead catalyzed his evolution into an even more influential voice for change. That evening, Jayden had dinner with Keisha Marshall, who was in Washington to consult with transportation officials on crew training protocols. Their improbable connection, from scholarship recipient to flight attendant to professional colleague, embodied the kind of full-circle journey that gave meaning to his work. The training program is being adopted by 3 more airlines next month, Keisha informed him as they discussed the progress of various initiatives. The Flight Attendants Union is fully on board now. They recognize this isn't about punishing individuals but creating a better environment for everyone. That was always the goal, Jayden agreed. Systemic problems require systemic solutions. As they discussed next steps, Jayden's phone rang with a call from the Atlantic Airways CEO. "Jayden, our quarterly customer satisfaction scores just came in. Overall ratings up 12%, with a 27% improvement among minority passengers. Your training program is working even better than we hoped." This concrete validation of the approach was gratifying. Change was actually happening, measurable and meaningful. The next morning, Jayden boarded another Atlantic Airways flight back to Atlanta. As he settled into his first-class seat, he noticed something different about the experience. The flight attendant, a middle-aged white woman named Patricia, greeted every passenger with the same warm professionalism, regardless of appearance or perceived status. When she reached Jayden, she smiled with genuine welcome. "Good morning, Mr. Harris. It's an honor to have you on board today. Can I get you anything before takeoff?" The simple dignity of being treated with the same respect as every other passenger, the basic courtesy that had been denied to him a month earlier, felt like the most meaningful measure of progress. As the flight reached cruising altitude, Jayden noticed a young black man in business attire being questioned about his seat assignment by another passenger. Before the situation could escalate, Patricia intervened smoothly. "This gentleman is in his assigned seat, sir. If you have any concerns about the seating arrangement, I'm happy to assist you with finding your correct seat." The passenger grumbled but moved on. The young man caught Jayden's eye and gave him a subtle nod of recognition, not of Jayden personally, but of the shared experience they both understood. Jayden smiled and returned the nod. Then he did something he rarely had the luxury of doing on flights. He closed his eyes and relaxed, knowing that one small corner of the world had become more just, more equitable, more humane because of a chain of events that began with discrimination but ended with transformation. As the plane soared eastward, Jayden reflected on his grandmother's words, "When they go low, you fly high." He had taken those words literally, using his position and resources to elevate not just himself but others who faced similar barriers. The journey wasn't over, systemic change never happened overnight, but each small victory created momentum for the next. The plane began its descent toward Atlanta, the city where this story had begun a month earlier. Jayden looked out the window at the sprawling landscape below, thinking about how a single interaction on a single day had created ripples that continued to expand in ways no one could have predicted. That was the true power of transformation, not just changing individual hearts and minds, but creating systems and structures that enabled justice to flourish regardless of who was watching or who held power in any given moment. As the wheels touched down on the runway, Jaden Harris felt something he hadn't expected when he boarded that fateful flight a month ago: genuine optimism about the possibility of progress. Not naive hope, but the grounded confidence that came from seeing real change unfold through deliberate, strategic action. The seatbelt sign turned off, and passengers began gathering their belongings. Patricia's voice came over the intercom: "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Atlanta. On behalf of Captain Richardson and our entire crew, thank you for flying with Atlantic Airways today. We value each and every one of our passengers and strive to make your experience exceptional." Simple words, but they reflected a meaningful shift in culture and practice. As Jaden stood to retrieve his bag from the overhead compartment, he noticed the young black man from earlier doing the same a few rows ahead. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment of unspoken understanding, Jaden saw both the progress made and the distance still to travel. The young man would board another flight someday, in another city, with another crew. Would he be treated with dignity and respect? The answer to that question would be the true measure of whether this story had created lasting change or merely a temporary correction. Jaden was committed to ensuring it was the former. The app, the training, the investment fund, the policy initiatives, all were designed not just to address what had happened to him, but to transform the experience for everyone who came after. As he walked through the terminal toward the exit, Jaden pulled out his phone and opened the Witness app. The dashboard showed over 5,000 new reports in the past 24 hours, each representing someone who now had a tool to document their experience and contribute to collective change. He scrolled through the anonymized data, noting patterns and trends that would inform the next iteration of the training program. This was how transformation happened, not through a single dramatic moment, but through the patient, persistent work of building better systems based on real experiences. Outside the airport, Maya was waiting with the car. "How was Washington?" she asked as they pulled away from the curb. "Productive," Jaden replied. "The committee seems serious about implementing the recommendations. And the app is gaining traction faster than we projected." "That's just the beginning," Maya said with a smile. "Wait until you see what's next." As they drove toward the Harris Innovations headquarters, Jaden gazed out at the Atlanta skyline, thinking about the extraordinary journey of the past month. From victim to advocate, from individual experience to systemic change, it was a transformation he never would have chosen but now wouldn't trade for anything. Amanda Pearson had looked at him and seen only his skin color. In doing so, she had inadvertently helped create a platform from which he could address the very prejudice she embodied. There was a powerful lesson in that irony, one that Jaden would carry forward as he continued the work of building a more equitable world, one flight, one app, one policy at a time. This story of Jaden Harris teaches us several powerful lessons about confronting discrimination. First, maintaining dignity in the face of prejudice can be more effective than responding with anger. Jaden's calm, strategic response ultimately created far more accountability than an emotional reaction would have. Second, true change requires moving beyond individual incidents to address systemic problems. Rather than focusing solely on punishing Amanda, Jaden created training programs, technology, and policies that could prevent similar situations for others. Third, privilege and power can be used constructively. Jaden leveraged his resources not for personal revenge but to build tools that empowered those without his advantages. Fourth, community forms in unexpected places when people recognize shared humanity. The conversations that emerged on the flight demonstrated how authentic dialogue can bridge differences and create understanding. Finally, transformation rarely happens through single dramatic moments, but through persistent, strategic efforts to change systems over time. The app, the training program, the investment fund, these methodical approaches created more lasting impact than any public shaming could have achieved. Ultimately, Jaden's story reminds us that how we respond to injustice can either perpetuate cycles of conflict or create opportunities for healing and progress. By choosing the latter, he transformed a moment of discrimination into a movement for change. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you could make a difference? Jaden's story shows that one person can create meaningful change with the right approach. If this story inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives about overcoming injustice. Share this video with someone who needs encouragement that speaking up matters, whether you're the person experiencing discrimination or a bystander with the power to help. Your voice can be the catalyst for transformation in someone else's story. Comment below with your thoughts. Would you have spoken up like Thomas did, or remained silent? What tools or resources do you think would help address discrimination in everyday situations? Your insights might help others navigate similar challenges. Thank you for joining us on this journey from insult to impact. Remember, true power isn't found in putting others down, but in lifting everyone up to their rightful place of dignity and respect.